Good evening and welcome to this council meeting of Glenorchy City Council on Monday the 26th of April. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet today on the land of the Muwanina people and acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional owners and ongoing custodians of this land on which we meet, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. Here with me in council chambers tonight I have Alderman Peter Ball, Alderman Stephen King, I'm Acting Mayor Beck Thomas, General Manager Tony McMullen, Alderman Gay Richardson, Alderman Simon Fraser and Alderman Melissa Carlton. We also have a number of council staff present. We have apologies tonight from Alderman Angela Ryan and we have attending via video link Alderman Kelly Sims and Alderman Jan Dunsby. We also have our Mayor, Christy Johnston, who is on an approved leave of absence. So I just note, in addition to the apology from Alderman Angela Ryan, that Mayor Christy Johnston is on an approved leave of absence tonight. As part of our efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19, physical attendance by members of the public at tonight's meeting is not currently permitted. Instead, we are live streaming on to Council's Facebook page and we welcome members of the public who are tuning in with us this evening. So item 2, we've done item 1, apologies. Item 2, confirmation of the minutes of the open meeting held on 29th of March. Do I have someone to move that the minutes of the council meeting held on 29th of March 2021 be confirmed and that the minutes of the special council meeting held on 19th of April be confirmed? Do I have a mover for that motion, please? Moved Alderman Richardson, seconded Alderman Ball. Thank you. Alderman Richardson, would you like to speak to the item?
No, no concerns with them, nothing to raise, thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion of the item? No? If not, I'll go back to the mover, Alderman Richardson. No?
Have to vote?
Happy to go to the vote? Great. Well, if you are able to indicate if you're for the motion by raising your hand, please. Just trying to see Alderman Dunsby there. If you're just able to unmute Alderman Dunsby. Or speak, say for.
Yep. Hands up, for.
For, great. Thank you, that is carried unanimously. Item 3, announcements by the Chair. There are no announcements this evening. So moving on to item 4, pecuniary interest notification. Do any aldermen have any pecuniary interest in tonight's agenda items? Nope. Okay, moving on, response to previous, item 5, response to previous public questions taken on notice. There are none there. There were none taken on notice that we have responses for this evening. So item 6, public question time. As I said, obviously we don't have members of the public present this evening, but we have had a number of questions submitted from community members and the answers to those questions are included in the agenda papers, which is available on Council's website. Item 7, petitions, deputations. General Manager, do we have any petitions? No? No petitions to table? Okay, moving on. Item 8, announcements by the Mayor. We have a recommendation that Council receive announcements about the activities of Acting Mayor Thomas, me, during the period 9th of April to 19th of April. Do I have someone to move that recommendation? Oh, Alderman Ball, and seconded Alderman King. Thank you. Any discussion of the item, Alderman Ball?
Open it to the floor for questions of you, Acting Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Ball. Any discussion of the item?
Just to say you've been busy, well done.
Thank you, Alderman King. No further discussion. I'll go back to the mover, Alderman Ball. Nothing further. Put it to the vote. We have a recommendation. If you could indicate by raising your hand if you are for the motion. Thank you. Just flick screens. Yeah, and that is carried unanimously. Moving on to item 9, recision of historical committees and working groups. We have a recommendation before us that Council rescind 11 committees and working groups. Do I have somebody to move that motion? Alderman Richardson, moved Alderman Richardson, second Alderman Fraser. Alderman Richardson.
Yes. No, this comes as a result of Council review of committees and is stage 1 of that review process. The committees listed here are no longer required or superseded And this motion will endeavour to tidy up those loose ends. There are a couple of committees in there, the Glenorchy City Concert Band and Citizen and Youth Citizens of the Year. They've been removed as S24, but it doesn't affect them in any way. They'll still have a working relationship with council, so that's not a concern. So, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman King.
Just on point 7, Mayor, the Untitled Park Master Plan Steering Committee no longer operational and superseded by master plan being developed by Tas Water. Should that be developed by Tas Water in conjunction with council, or is it just Tas Water's master plan?
Thank you. General Manager?
My understanding is that Tas Water is developing a master plan. Council's contributing funding to that as well, and that at the end of that process we will have both a master plan and some accurate costing. So we are making a contribution to it, yes.
So it is kind of in conjunction with us in that sense, or is that, am I putting too much emphasis on it?
The onus is really with Tas Water, so Tas Water is really driving that. Formerly, we had an earlier master plan process that involved council being the driver, and that process didn't proceed. So this is a new process with Tas Water in the driving seat.
Thank you, General.
Sorry, do you have any end date on that?
I don't have it to hand, but something I can get back to you on.
That's one. That's yeah.
Thank you, General Manager. And I note that doesn't substantially affect the recommendation before us, Alderman King. So you satisfied with that?
Yeah.
Yep. Great. Excellent. Any other questions or discussion of the item? No? I'll go back to the mover, Alderman Richardson.
No, nothing further
Nothing
to
further?
add. Thank you.
Great, we'll go to the vote. If you could raise your hand to indicate if you're for the motion, please. That is carried unanimously. Moving on to item 10, petition Mill Lane Car Park. So this report refers to the petition received from our on the 23rd of March, titled Stop Selling Our Car Park. So we have a recommendation before us. Do I have someone to move the recommendation? Alderman King? Seconded? Alderman Ball? Thank you, Alderman King.
Thank you. There's been a lot of discussion around this in previous meetings, and again I note that the recommendation is just to receive and note the petition, and that the numbers weren't sufficient anyway, but nevertheless this is still a future thing in motion, so I just accept the recommendation as it is.
Alderman King, any further discussion of the item? Alderman Fraser.
I think it's worth noting that my feeling is that there's a lot of misunderstanding in the community about the way the council disposes of assets, and I think this is a very good example of it. Someone might have to correct me, but the starting process for this, I think, was over a year ago, and I think that the only thing that we agreed to was investigation, was my memory. But there's certainly, there's a long process involved with disposing of assets. There's full transparency, full accountability, and if there's anyone in the community that feels like the council is doing something secretive or dishonest, that's simply not the case. Simply not the case. This is a very open and transparent process, and no decision has been made further than just investigating whether this is an asset that council would like to sell. I certainly recognise a huge amount of work that this particular individual is putting into doing these petitions, and I think we should acknowledge that, but my feeling is it's just a bit premature, really.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Any further discussion on the item? No, I'd like to speak to the item. I know that this is the third petition that Council has received on this matter. On this particular petition, there were 360 eligible signatures, and I note that each petition is treated separately as required under the Local Government Act. Alderman Fraser is quite right. We have not yet even resolved to commence the Section 178 process, which is the formal process we are required to go through to dispose of any land by way of sale or lease. Council is undertaking an initial investigation at the moment prior to making any decision about whether we do or don't go through the formal Section 178 process, and I strongly encourage people who have concerns about this to voice those concerns through the appropriate channels, which are through the preliminary investigation mechanisms, and or if we do resolve to go through the Section 178 process, through a formal submission then. I note petitions are most certainly an option for community members with concerns to raise those concerns with council. However, I also do note that they do create a significant administrative burden for council staff and taking up a lot of time that could be perhaps better spent on other matters. So I just like to add that we do have appropriate mechanisms, other mechanisms more appropriate to voice these concerns, and I encourage community members to do that when the opportunities arise. If there's no further discussion, I'll go back to the mover, Alderman King.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I think Alderman Fraser and yourself have added enough to the discussion to let people be fully aware of the processes that take place. And no, we just accept the motion as it is. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a motion to receive and note the petition and note the number of signatories and note that a decision on whether to dispose of the land will be the subject formally considered by council at a future meeting. Do I have somebody to... Oh, sorry. You are for the motion. I'll just see if we can get Alderman Sims there. Yep, that's carried unanimously. Moving on to item 11, information disclosure policy. Do I have somebody to move this item? Alderman Richardson? Someone to second the item. Alderman Fraser. Thank you, Alderman Richardson.
Yes, this policy comes about by an audit of our policies. The intent is to comply with the Right to Information Act and Ombudsman's guidelines regarding disclosing information and also assist the public in navigating the requirements of the Act. So I'm happy to adopt the policy. Yep.
Thank you. Any further discussion of the item?
I think that at the end was perfect.
No further discussion of the item? Anything to close debate, Alderman Richardson?
Nothing more to add, thank you.
Nothing more to add. I'll go to the vote. If you could raise your hand if you're for the motion, please. That is carried unanimously. Item 12, Childcare Connections Policy and Procedures Review. Do I have somebody to move this motion? Moved Alderman Richardson, seconded Alderman Fraser. Alderman Richardson.
Thank you. Yes, these three policies have been updated from the report, I believe, to include Move Well, Eat Well award, which is a requirement introduced after the policies were last approved. So I'm happy to support the motion to adopt them. So, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Carlton.
Thank you very much. Just wanted to get a quick summary of what the Move Well, Eat Well award entails and the impacts that it may have on our families.
General Manager.
I'd suggest the Director of Community and Customer Services.
Thank you. Director.
We can share it.
Just
Thank
see,
you.
I think we might have the coordinator of childcare services online. We'll just check if she's there first, Ben. If not, sorry.
It's just connecting.
That's right.
Just bear with us as we connect the Coordinator of Childcare Services.
Acting Mayor, as opposed to waiting, because this might take a little while. Kate is on the other side of the river, so it might be a little while the satellite bounces backwards and forwards. I'll have a dip, and if Kate does pop up, she might be able to add to my incomprehensive response, but thank you for the question. The Move Well, Eat Well process is about recognising services that are promoting positive eating experiences for children and families, not only working with the children, but obviously working with the family involved completely. It allows us to increase the wellness of our family groups wholly around our services, and also as we gain accreditation, it also opens up an avenue of funding for grant opportunities because we are accredited in that space.
Thank you, Director. Anything to add, Kate?
Sorry, Acting Mayor, perhaps when the response comes through tomorrow by lunchtime, I'll email that through.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Director. Does that answer your question, Alderman Carlton?
Thank you. So just in summary, we're expecting this to be a positive result for our families that are engaging with the service. So from what I understand, we don't provide food for our families, so it's something that they need to provide, and the policy outlines what they shouldn't be bringing to childcare.
Thank you. Through you, Acting Mayor. That's correct, Alderman. Because in the service that we provide at the moment, our families provide their own food. We don't have full control over what nutritional requirements are placed in children's lunches and morning and afternoon teas. So it's a way of encouraging and educating our families to improve that nutritional input to their family members.
Thank you. And I can see that families have been consulted as required as part of the policy change. And I'm assuming that it's been quite positively received by families.
Thank you again, through you, Acting Mayor. That's correct. As we're required to with all our policy changes, families, educators are all required to and have provision of input into those policies prior to them being adopted, and that's happened again with this particular three set of policies. And as you outlined, Alderman Carlton, the response has been quite positive from our families, so a good way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Alderman Carlton. Any further discussion of the item? If not, I go back to the mover, Alderman Richardson.
I'd just like to take the opportunity to acknowledge and thank the staff working in our childcare centres. It's a heavily regulated industry. It has its challenges, and our employees really don't get the credit they deserve. So I just want to thank them very much for looking after our little people.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. No further discussion. I will go to the vote. Please raise your hand if you are for the motion. That is carried unanimously. Moving on to item 13, Quarterly Report, Quarter 3, 2020-21. Do I have somebody to move this motion? Moved Alderman Fraser, seconded Alderman Bull. Alderman Fraser.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. I actually have a few questions, which I might start off with. So I noticed that there was a overspend in vegetation control of 255,000, which is a big chunk of money. I wondered whether the council has considered any sort of innovative ways of dealing with vegetation so that that kind of budget blowout doesn't happen again. And my observation would be that the council's found it very difficult to keep on top of vegetation this season, despite that. Has there been any analysis about what can be better done to manage vegetation in the municipality?
Manager.
Through you, Acting Mayor. So my understanding, and the Director may or may not be able to provide some further comment on this, but my understanding is that we've had an extremely strong growing season this particular season. So additional rain has contributed to much more growth than we would expect or experience in a normal year. And this has led to more expenditure on contractors to assist with vegetation control. So it's really, we just have differences in seasonality year on year, and this is a particularly big year. So certainly we'll be looking to some work around, in future, around differentiating service levels on a hierarchy of impact in terms of, for example, high-profile sites getting perhaps a higher level of service than some of the less prominent sites. But that's a work in progress in terms of exploring that. But ultimately, the difference comes down to a very strong growing season, and it's resulted in stronger growth and more work required to manage it.
I wonder though if maybe through landscaping controls there's a possibility of planning out areas so they don't have to be mowed. There's something that's occurred to me anyway that might be something worth thinking about.
Director.
Putting it on the spot.
First meeting, first day in the season, first meeting, and
through you, Acting Mayor, controls through landscaping could be considered. However, that will still have an impact on maintenance because the vegetation will still have to be maintained to a certain extent. It is something that could be considered, but it also depends on location, where it is, and whether it needs to be, watered to get it going. And I believe there was also more mechanical means needed as far as resources to go to control vegetation, hence the additional cost.
Yeah, General Manager, Acting Mayor, if I may.
yes, sure. Frank Chen.
So this year, actually, we tried using machinery to do the slushing on the roadside. So this is some innovative way of trying to explore whether there's a more effective way, efficiently to do with slushing, and we got really good outcome from that machinery slushing, and we consider to continue that exercise next year to get a better outcome, meanwhile drive efficiency and reduce cost.
Thank you. Yes, sure, Alderman Fraser.
The Capital Works program is, we're 3/4 through the financial year, it's only 50% completed at this point. Is that I noticed there was a note in the report about this, but is that all of that explained by late invoices, or is there some other explanation?
Manager?
Through you, Mayor, my understanding is that the baseline Capital Works is pretty much on track. However, we have had experienced delays in some property projects, Commonwealth funded property projects, in terms of delays in finalising grant deeds and difficulties around procurement, given escalation of costs on particular projects and the need to revisit cost estimates and scoping of projects. But from what I understand, the base level Capital Works program, in terms of our year-on-year activities, is progressing well.
There was a variance of approximately 600,000 for the line item economic stimulus in the capital budget. I couldn't see a note accompanying that. I just wondered whether we could get an explanation for that, please.
Manager Finance, Tina?
Thank you, through you, Acting Mayor. So that one's actually a pure timing difference. So the part of the economic recovery program that you would remember we borrowed $5 million for earlier this financial year. The timing and the nature of the delivery of those works, some of them will tip over into next financial year. So that one is purely a timing difference of when that expenditure will occur.
Okay, and while you're there,
Yeah, I'll stay put.
There was also, interestingly, a variance of 8% in automatic allowances, which I found surprising, given that I know that some of us have elected not to accept an increase in the past financial year. I was just curious about why there would be an 8% increase in automatic allowances. One item for automatic allowances.
Through you, Acting Mayor, that line is not only the payment that the aldermen receive, it also includes the allowances for things like the expenditure, particularly in relation to IT expenditure. So there's an allowance of, I think it's $2,000 per annum per alderman that hasn't been fully expended this year. So there's been an offset either way on that one.
Yes.
There was a jump in formal complaints in the third quarter also, 19 complaints. I just wondered whether we can get an idea of what they related to in general, which...
Director David Ronaldson, we'll just give you a minute to find your spot.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Acting Mayor. Yes, firstly, there was an increase, and that's because we believe we're tracking them, capturing them in a more efficient way. So that's a positive I'd take from that. Of the 19 requests, they go across a range of council's services. So a number of them were around potholes, stormwater, footpaths, a couple of them in relation to parking, fire abatement, waste, and a couple of animal management queries. Specifically, need to inform you that a lot of them were around the timing of response to the resident in the first place, and they were captured in that way, so the response may have been a little bit slower than the resident actually expected. I recall picking up one particular response that we had a negative comment in our customer service charter around, where the resident had been critical that we hadn't got back to them within the actual day that the complaint was lodged. So there's a little refinement in how we're recording those at the moment, but in answer to the question, they're across a range of services, as I've outlined, and the majority of them were they weren't being, the type of complaint was they weren't being responded to quick enough. So pothole wasn't responded to quick enough, animal management matter wasn't responded to quick enough in expectation, as opposed to what our charter actually says we will respond in. So there's a little bit more work there, I think, for our customer service staff and for our broader staff to interact with our community around what to expect in response times too. Thank you.
Final question. I noticed that the 2 new operational risks were identified by our auditor, I think our external auditor, and added to the council's risk register. I couldn't see actually what they were, and I just wondered whether the GM is able to tell us about those in an open meeting.
General Managers delegating to Tracy Elrick, our Manager of Governance and Risk.
Through you, Acting Mayor. The 2 were to do with our long-term financial planning and strategic plans, and they were revolving around improvements in terms of the interoperability of both those plans. So.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Alderman King.
Just a quick question to add on to Alderman Fraser's initial question, and it's probably a half question in a sense, if there can be such a thing, but the $250,000 overspend, are we budgeting enough there? And I know we must be, or we should be, but it's sort of an open-ended question. Are we budgeting enough? Because it does seem a lot of rain to give us that much, over the cost. But so, are we budget enough in the first place, or is it an average over the years we take? How do we come up with that budget?
Well, through you, Mayor, the CFO is championing the bit to respond to that.
She got glasses. This is what she lives for.
Dorothy Dixer, is it?
Yeah.
No, please no.
Thank you, through you, Acting Mayor. So yes, in relation to the overspend, as was setting of the budget, but obviously we have no control over things like weather factors. What I can respond to that one in saying is that as a result of that overspend, we're actively going to underspend and find cost savings in other activities in the same departments to offset that by the end of the financial year.
Thank you. Anything further, Alderman King?
No, I'm totally satisfied with that. So what more could you ask for?
Wonderful. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Carlton.
Thank you very much. While we have you here, we can clearly see that there's been some swings and roundabouts with the budget. There's been some increase in revenue that we weren't expecting and some decreases in expenditure. And I note too that the figures that we see here are until the end of April, and they're not really necessarily an indication of where we might be at the end of the financial year. But one that did come out a little bit surprising, just wanted to get a bit more information about that, was the public compliance infringements. So on page 15, under the explanatory notes, there's a variance of 71,000 as at the end of April, which is around 9% of what was budgeted for revenue. Just wanted to get a bit of information about that particular variance.
Through you, Acting Mayor. As yourselves would remember, it was a lead-in time post-COVID when we returned to a sense of normality. And at the beginning of the year, we did not recover as quickly in our public compliance area as we were expecting to actually recover. The following months, from somewhere around about middle to the end of August, the activity levels and our revenue got back to what we would call normal levels, but we did not recover the revenue that we were not able to recoup in the first sort of month to 6 weeks of the financial year.
Thank you.
Further, Alderman Carlton. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Richardson.
Most of my questions were covered by other aldermen, so that was good. I just want to acknowledge those involved with Moon Taste of the World this year, although it was again a scaled down version due to COVID. The feedback was very positive and it was very successful, so just thank everybody involved with that.
Any further discussion of the item? I just had one question, if I may, please. I note in the report it reports on visits to the dog park at Chapel Street, and the latest data shows that there were 11,000 visits to the dog park in 3 months, which equates to around 120 visits a day. I do note there was a sharp increase, though, on previous reports. I know we had some issues with the gate counter and the algorithm associated with that at the dog park, so I just wondered whether that sharp increase now from Q1 and 2 was caused by that, and if so, have those issues been resolved, and is that an accurate representation of the visits to the dog park? Oh, take that one on notice. Yep. Or Ali, did you want to? Thank you.
To you, Acting Mayor. Yes, that is correct. We have an external consultant who analyses the data for us, and we did pick up that there's an error. So there's multiple counters that work, and one of them wasn't. So that's why there's suddenly a change. So it might be showing that some of the earlier data may not have been as accurate. So the more recent to what is actually occurring, which is obviously quite substantial.
Wow.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for answering that question. 120 visits a day. Amazing. Well, I too would just briefly like to speak to the item if there's no further discussion of the item. Just to acknowledge, as Alderman Richardson did, that we held a very successful Moon Taste of the World festival with a number of events around our community, and that certainly was one of our strategic and operational highlights for Q3, and I acknowledge the staff that were involved and also the community members who participated and came out, and that, that's what a festival is all about. It's made up by the community members who contribute to it and who participate in the events. So that was fantastic. There are some other highlights noted in the General Manager's report and in the quarterly report overall around our Greater Glenorchy plan. So over the last quarter, we have finalised our visionary precinct plans for the Glenorchy, Moona and Claremont areas, which is really quite a significant achievement that we have managed to do in a short time. We have finalised our arts and culture strategy, and we have significantly increased development activity. It was my pleasure to present last week at the Tasmanian Major Projects Conference and talk about the $1.9 billion development pipeline that we have in Glenorchy. So lots of great things reported on in our quarterly report, and I can see that aldermen have enjoyed reading it, and I'm really grateful, and I encourage community members to read it as well. But if there's no further discussion, I'll go back to the mover, Alderman Fraser.
No, I think you've heard enough from me.
Great, thank you. So we have a recommendation that we receive and note the quarterly report. Can you please indicate by raising your hand if you're for the motion? That is carried unanimously. Item 14, Procurement and Contracts Monthly Report. Do I have someone to move this motion? Alderman Bull, someone to second? Alderman Richardson. Alderman Bull.
Yes, the report just says that there were no exemptions to Council's Code for tenders of contracts between 16th of March and 12th of April, so I just support the recommendation.
Okay. Thank you, Alderman Bull.
Pretty easy.
Any further discussion of the item? No, nothing further. Alderman Bull to close debate? No, we'll go to the vote. If you please raise your hand to indicate if you're for the motion. That is carried unanimously. Item 15, notices of motion, questions on notice or without notice in open council. Do I have any questions on without notice? Alderman Fraser.
Notice, Acting Mayor. So look, I recently reported some substandard work conducted by Tas Water and its contractors. It happened to be conducted near where I live, so I had a box seat view, a new concrete pathway which wasn't far from my home. There was an uneven cut made into a section of the pathway to repair a leaking water pipe, which is perfectly okay, but then this cut was just simply re-concreted without cutting out the entire section of the footpath and repairing it properly. I followed this up with council officers. The work, obviously that got back to Tas Water, the work was inspected, and they obviously found that it was substandard as well, and have came back and rectified their substandard work. However, I'm very aware that if I hadn't have reported that, the brand new footpath would be sitting there with a very ugly looking cut in the middle of it, which no doubt would probably compromise the longevity of the path in the long run. And as it goes, I've since then have noticed everywhere in footpaths all over the city these really ugly saw cuts that have just been dumped into the middle of sometimes quite new pathways, and when you can still see the saw cuts in the corner of the works. To my mind, and it was the same standard of work that I observed, which the Tas Water obviously decided was not good enough. I guess the question that I'm getting at here is how many complaints have been made over the last few years about Tas Water's work, and is there anything that Glenorchy City can do? I recognise that Tas Water operate under different legislation and have powers to do this sort of work without consulting us, but is there anything else that the Glenorchy City Council can do to keep them more accountable for the standard of work they do on council infrastructure?
Through you, Mayor, I might make a general comment, and probably the Director could also make a more informed general comment. This is not, and I'm loath to just name individual service providers, but this is a general problem across a range of service providers. We've had obviously large-scale gas pipeline and kind of come through our city in the past. So we've got large projects where interstate contractors come in and do a job lot and then move on. And we also have the service providers. and it is an ongoing issue for council in terms of the integrity of its assets. But perhaps the director may be able to comment in greater detail about that.
Director.
Thank you. Through you, Acting Mayor. Some time ago we did have a program where we were sending our works program to the authorities, other service providers, to make them aware of where we were doing works so that we could try and combine their works and our own works, like renewal of footpaths and everything. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work out that way, that they can do the works at the same time we're doing ours, or sometimes a service might fail and they have to attend to that. And you know, when the gas rollout happened, we tried to make sure that they were replacing the full width of the footpath, but that basically was a bit unreasonable because there was a lot of extra cost, and so we had to settle for just the width of the trench they were digging at the time. But if there's work that people think is substandard, I would suggest that they do report it and we can inspect, and then we can have that conversation with those service providers at any given time. Yep. It is hard to keep on top of because there are a lot of assets that are underground and a lot of maintenance and service work that needs to be conducted on those assets.
Certainly, and no argument with that. But I guess what I'm driving at here is do we have a service level agreement with these contractors that says, okay, fine, you can cut into our footpath and our road, but you need to repair it to this standard that we deem acceptable.
Those standards do exist.
Right.
It's actually making sure they work to those standards, and that's where we need to have that. Yep, we need to inspect or have that report so we can go and inspect. Yep.
Gentlemen, if I may.
Could we ask? Oh, sorry.
Hang on. Frank?
Yes, we do have a compliance officer. He's pretty much full-time following up all those reinstatement work carried on our assets. And as you probably, Alderman Fraser mentioned that all those utility providers, they have on the relevant legislation, they do have powers to carry out work on our road without notifying us one by one or individually. So we do rely on the public to report those poor reinstatement a lot of time. So I do encourage aldermen and also the residents, whoever notified poor reinstatement within our municipality, come to council, and we do have a compliance officer definitely follow up with them. And in terms of the standard, we do issue a permit called road opening permit to those utilities. They are probably more annual permit instead of issued on a case-by-case basis. And in that permit, there are some reinstatement standards outlined in terms of what's the quality and what's the methodology the utilities and their contractor should reinstate our footpaths or road to. And for example, if the footpath is less than 2 years old, the contractor is required to replace the full panel instead of just cut a notch in our footpaths. So we do have those requirements, but the challenging part is the work were carried out by utilities providers and their subcontractor or even their subcontractor, which is hard for council to track what projects have been carried out in our city. So it would be good to have. I would do encourage the community to report those poor reinstatement to us once they notice those defects.
Thank you.
Alderman Dunsby here.
Yes, Alderman Dunsby.
Just in support of the comments made by Alderman Fraser, in a couple of instances I've reported similar situations, and some of it's also been not like-for-like replacements. So a concrete path was dug up and it was replaced with bitumen and things like that. So it's down to people to report it. So perhaps at some stage when we're communicating, sending out newsletters, whatever, with our community, we can let them know. They can let us know where some work is substandard so that they know there is a reporting process back to us if they recognise it before it becomes a trip hazard. Thank you.
Alderman Dunsby. Alderman King.
Just to add to that then, is it possible that through the department that maybe an agreement could be struck with Tas Water or Tas Gas that any any work that's done on any of our infrastructure, that they send photos of what they've done and 4 or 5 photos of when they've dug it out and as they repair it. If Alderman Fraser hadn't seen what had gone on, or as Alderman Dunsby said, it's a different product they put back in, bitumen instead of concrete, that, if every repair was, photos of it were taken and then sent off to yourself or your department, then we would know what's gone on and no one could dodge it. It'd be a simple arrangement that's part of the process.
And if I may, Acting Mayor, that is what in the end contractors have to do with their, the people they're contracting to.
Director?
Yes, through you, Acting Mayor, we could have a look at our road opening permit system to ensure that there is a notification process and a final check conducted on any repairs that are done.
Thank you. Any other questions without notice?
Alderman Dunsby?
Yes, Alderman Dunsby.
I noticed in the public questions that have been raised there, one of them mentions that a response will be provided in writing to the person who wrote them in. If a question is asked in public question time, can we be rest assured that the answers will be provided in the council's minutes as well, not just to that particular person, given they've raised it in that context?
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. General Manager?
I might ask the Executive Officer just to make a comment on that one.
Sure. Executive Officer?
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby, through you, Acting Mayor. Yes, you can be assured they'll be published in the agenda as well.
Thank you.
Or the minutes, as the case may be. They will generally appear in the agenda for the next meeting, rather than the minutes of this meeting, an answer not having been provided at this meeting.
Sure, of course.
Thank you. Just that, there is, when they're raised in the public arena, the public are interested in the answers as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions without notice? No? That concludes our open council meeting for this evening. So thank you to members of public who have tuned in on Facebook this evening. Our next council meeting will be held on Monday, the 31st of May 2021, and we'll be live streaming again. Until then, take care, be kind to each other, and good night.
Move that we go into closed council, Acting Mayor.
Moved Alderman King, seconded Peter Ball. Alderman Ball, can please indicate if you are for the motion by raising your hand. That is carried unanimously.